All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Backyard Composting. So we are the UC Master Gardeners of Napa County, and our mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices to the residents of California, and to be guided by our core values and strategic initiatives. So tonight, as you know, we're talking about composting. And the definition of composting is the process in which organic substances are reduced from large volumes of rapidly decomposable materials to small volumes of materials which continue to decompose slowly. So simply put, compost is the natural process of decomposition. It occurs in nature, but can be speeded up with human intervention. The many benefits of compost. It reduces landfill waste. Approximately 30% of what we send to landfill is organic materials. Compost improves the soil structure in a variety of ways. It improves the water penetration in heavy soils. It improves water and nutrient retention in all soils. It improves drainage and aeration in all soils. It slowly releases nutrients and minerals that plants use, and it also conserves soil moisture. Composting is a way to also fight climate change. It reduces trips to the landfill. One of the examples I like to talk about is that if you had a head of lettuce and you put it in the landfill, it could take upwards of 25 years for that head of lettuce to decompose. It's much faster when you compost. So some uses for compost. Compost is considered a soil conditioner. And you notice we underline that. It is considered a soil conditioner. It's not a fertilizer. As a master gardener, we also like to say that it improves the tilth. And what that means is that it helps the physical condition of the soil, which makes it easier for plants to absorb nutrients and water. It can also be used as a soil amendment. You can use it as mulch. You can also add it with your potting mix. So now we're going to talk about the biology of composting. Decomposers consist of micro and macroorganisms. The activity of these organisms create heat, which up to a point speeds up the process. If it's too hot, it kills the decomposers. Decomposition tends to balance the carbon and nitrogen ratio. Complete decomposition results in a humus-like substance called compost. Next, we're going to talk about what does compost need. Well, this picture, of course, is we have several companies here in the Napa Valley that do composting, and this is showing one of those trucks at work. But what do you need? You need those decomposers, which we're going to also talk about a little bit further. You need water, you need air, and you also need temperature. We're going to talk later about the different types of temperatures and how the importance that they play in the process. And don't forget the food, got to have the food. Those decomposers are eating something, they're eating food. So let's talk about the decomposers to start off. So we have macroorganisms, and these are the worms, the sow bugs, etc. And then we also have the microorganisms, which are the bacteria, the fungi, and the Actinomycetes. I know big words, but we're going to talk about them in a moment. So looking at this fun food web gives you an idea of the types of decomposers that are worked in a food pile or a compost pile. So you have your bugs, different types of bugs, you have your roundworms, you have some snails, mites, all the things we see in our backyard. And of course, along the top, you see the fungi, which of course, as we mentioned earlier, the fungi are the micro, not the macro. And I like to talk about, when we talk about macroorganisms and microorganisms, think of a kitchen grater. The coarse side of a kitchen grater grates up the food into coarser chunks. The fine side, which in our case would be the micro, breaks those particles into even smaller pieces. So the macroorganisms, they're the physical decomposers. They chew or tear the matter. Some people consider them pests, and they work in the pile while it's cool. And so you see some examples of the ants and the centipedes and the pill bugs. And what they're really doing when they are chewing and tearing the matter, they are making the surface area greater, creating more surface area for the microorganisms to work. So the microorganisms. The microorganisms are the chemical decomposers. They're the most important of the decomposers. And we have three types: psychrophiles, mesophiles, and thermophiles. And we're going to talk more about those. Each of those thrive under certain temperatures and moisture levels. They're nutritionally diverse. They will eat most anything. They can reproduce at a very rapid rate, and they use carbon for energy and nitrogen to build protein in their bodies. Oxidation also of organic matter heats up the compost pile. So let's talk about this bacteria. The psychrophiles, they're the first to start work, and they start work at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit to give off a small amount of heat. Then we see the mesophiles come into play, and they thrive at about 70 degrees to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and they do most of the work in cool and warm method compost piles. And you're going to hear us talk later about cool and warm method compost piles. The thermophiles are the workhorses. They thrive at a much higher temperature, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, upwards to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. They work extremely fast. Remember when I mentioned earlier about that head of lettuce in a landfill taking almost up to 25 years in some cases? Look at this. This works up within 3 to 5 days. What it also does is that it changes the organic material to a uniform deep brown color. So we now have decomposition has taken place. So once it's taken place, we have to stabilize our pile. And so in the stabilization phase, the fungi play a part. The saprophytic fungi obtain their energy from and help decompose the dead and decaying matter. The actinomycetes, which are part bacteria and part fungi, they produce a grayish cobwebby substance, and they're responsible for that wonderful earthy smell to good compost. And it frees carbon and nitrogen for plant use. Next, Sue Helms will talk to us about the food.
Hi, I get to talk to you about the ingredients that will go into your compost pile. And people talk about ingredients for compost as either greens or browns. And I'm going to start talking about the browns. And there's a lovely picture on the screen of some things. I think it's like yard waste and different things. I can't really see because mine's very tiny. But the browns are carbon rich, and they're usually dry. They might be dry debris from your garden. They could be straw. They could be, I have a garbage can of leaves that I saved from my tree in front because I get a lot of leaves off that tree in the fall. And I'm using that for compost. You could use rice hulls. You can even use shredded paper or cardboard. You could use prunings. And I love this, that dried grass clippings are brown. Fresh grass clippings, however, are our next category, which are the greens. Next slide, please. There's a nice picture here of a kitchen yard waste container. And there's lots of things in there that you could have and put into your compost pile. You might have green leaves. I have a chard plant that has gone amok, and I'm going to use that in my compost soon. I might use kitchen waste, like different vegetables and fruits. As I'm preparing food, I'll throw that in my compost bin. Like I said, green grass clippings are considered green because they're nitrogen rich. Coffee grounds and tea bags are the brown things that are very nitrogen rich, and they're great for your compost. Other fresh garden debris you might want to use, and you could use manure from animals that only eat plants. How much of the greens and the browns do you want? You want to have roughly 50% of each one by volume. It's actually, you might look and see a percentage of like 1 to 30. I want you to think about when you have a yard waste can full of grass clippings from mowing a lawn. Starts out quite bulky and becomes quite condensed. So if you think about trying to gather about equal amounts of browns and greens, you'll be set. So now this slide's talking about how you get your material down to a good size. On the left, you see a pair of kitchen shears. On the right, you see the kitchen scraps, and the white things, just for your information, are tortillas. And in the middle, that's about the size you want to get to, fairly small, because the smaller it is, the quicker it will become compost. The next slide, please. This is an important one. What not to add to your compost pile. Especially if you don't want to have animals invading your compost pile. You don't want any meat or fish products or dairy, cheese. You don't want food scraps off your plate. You don't want fats or oils, and that even includes when you make that beautiful salad that you tossed with the vinaigrette. Don't throw that into your compost. You don't want to add soil because you don't need it. You don't want to add wood ashes. You don't want to add weeds that you can see the seeds. And honestly, you don't want to add any weeds where, some weeds you go to dig it up and it seems to create more plants. You don't want to add those to your compost. You also don't want to add manure from meat-eating animals, like pets. Here's what's interesting. A lot of these things on this list can be added into your food waste if you happen to live in the city of Napa or receive your garbage service from Napa Recycling. They do take food scraps and most of these things, not the soil and not the meat-eating animal manure, but they will take that into their yard waste bin. If you are in American Canyon or St. Helena or up by Berryessa, check with your providers because things are changing. I was reading that I heard that it was maybe going to happen in St. Helena, but now maybe it's not going to happen. But anyway, just keep on it because it's going to eventually happen. So call your provider. Oh, and one more thing not to add. Don't add thorns or like your rose bushes, your clippings from that, or blackberry bushes, because they will not compost. You'll end up with thorns. And don't add things like ivy because they will just end up producing more ivy plants. How lovely is that? They will not break down. Okay, next slide, please. These are the 5 different kinds of composting we're going to talk briefly about tonight. The first one is worm composting. You see the lovely little wiggly worm there. The next one, there's actually a picture for that on the screen. Lasagna or sheet composting, or as I'm starting to call it, layer composting. Then cool or no fuss composting. These last three are the ones that relate to temperature. Warm composting, which is a hybrid and quite popular. And then the last one is rapid or hot composting. So to begin talking about these different methods, I'm going to turn it over to Penny Paul.
Hi, I'm Penny Paul, and I want to invite you to sign up for our Zoom workshop on June 12th on worm composting. Worms eat 90% of what you feed them from your kitchen scraps and garden and turn it into a wonderful balanced fertilizer. It's different than regular compost. Compost is not a fertilizer, but worm poo is. If you go to buy it, it costs a lot of money, and it's called worm gold because it's cost a lot of money. I became interested when I saw in Life magazine the picture of a buried hot dog inside a newspaper that had been buried in a landfill in New York State. It had been there for several years, and because of the lack of oxygen in the landfill, both looked like they were just buried. The picture of the two worms is from one of my bins on cardboard, and they are making more babies. And we will talk about their reproductive habits during the workshop. In the workshop, we will show you how to build a worm bed and explain which worms to use. You will receive a bin, materials to build the bedding, and also the worms to start the system. The do's and don'ts of worm composting will be explained to you, and there will be time for you to ask questions. You can save landfills and make this wonderful worm castings right in your home or garage, and you can watch your garbage bill for dates to sign up. So please join us.
Thanks, Penny. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of composting that you can do. And one that you will hear called lasagna, and the picture that we saw a minute ago of the layers. It's not a great picture, but you know, it's where you would put layers of things on top of each other. It's ideal for conditioning areas of your yard that maybe have been neglected. It's terrific for getting rid of those patches of lawn that you no longer want. And I've even used it where I suddenly get some weed in a flower bed that I don't want, and I'll just do a modified sheet composting on it, and it just kind of the problem goes away, which is terrific. What you're going to do is there will be materials that you need to gather, and you are going to first wet the soil and moisten each layer as you put it down. And you're going to start by putting down cardboard or layers of newspaper. And there's different theories about how many layers of newspaper, between 5 and 8 sheets. I tend to use cardboard, and I have done big, vast expanses of my yard with appliance cardboard. And so you're going to do then alternating layers of whatever you're using, or maybe you could use both newspapers and then cardboard later on. But you're going to put grass clippings and then leaves. You can add things in different layers, and usually you end up with straw on the top. That seems to be a good one. When the materials have decomposed, you're ready to plant. That's the kind of the lasagna form of this. Next slide. And then this is one that I actually did. I had lawn. It was planted 28 years ago. It was, low drought fescue, and it just turned into this nasty, prickly grass that wasn't really fun to be on. And I decided instead to put a garden in its place. So I gathered a lot of appliance boxes, and I used, well, at first I didn't have anything holding the cardboard down, but after a windy day, I realized not a good plan. And so I'm hoping you can see my landscape staple that they use for landscape fabric. And that worked terrific. I just poke it through where I thought they might be kind of flopping. And then I marked out rows, and I had someone helping me, and they would come wheelbarrows. I actually got compost from the city. So this is a modified view of this. You could do sheet composting with this, but I just decided to do it quickly. So I put the compost down, and then next slide. This is when I was done with the first year. I put rice straw down as a pathway, and it actually has worked really well. Where I have weeds that have come through, where I put the compost down on top of the cardboard, they're really easy to pull out. And the weeds in my yard are not easy to pull out. It's a great way to get, like I said, get rid of weeds, get rid of lawn, and to condition your soil. And oh, we will be doing a workshop on sheet composting on April 24th in conjunction with the city for their Earth Day. It'll be at 10 in the morning. And now I want to talk to you about the different kinds of composting that are related to temperature. Next slide, please. Cool or no fuss composting. There really should be quotation marks around this next. Compost happens. It will eventually become compost. You don't have to do much to it. It will eventually get there. It's just going to take a long time. It can take from up to 1 to 2 years. You could keep adding things to it. Doesn't matter. It's just going to be moving slowly. You don't have to really control it or monitor it. You're not going to be turning it. But here's the negative parts of it. It does not kill weed seeds or pathogens that might be in your soil. And there's the microbes and microphiles, have to look at the word, at work. Next slide. If you were willing to do a little bit more, the next version of composting, warm compost, is very popular. It's a hybrid of between cool and hot. And I think it's probably the most common. You may or may not choose to add new organic material to it. The pile will get warm. You'll be able to feel that. You could turn it occasionally. And it takes between 3 months to 1 year to complete. It will not kill weed seeds or pathogens that might be in your soil. Like if you had a diseased plant and you accidentally threw it into your compost, you may not be killing that with this. Next slide. Rapid or hot composting is the preferred method of UC Davis. It's very controlled. It's kind of like when you're baking a cake and you have all your ingredients put out in front of you, or when you like to cook, you like to do the little white bowls with all your ingredients, like on cooking shows. You will have all your materials together. You will build your pile with equal volumes of brown and green, and you will not add any more materials after that. Your pile will heat up quite quickly, and you will turn it every 3 to 5 days. You will kill many pathogens and many weed seeds. But here's the awesome part about this. You could have complete decomposition in 3 to 8 weeks, which is incredibly fast. Next slide. This is a list of all the temperatures that kill soil organisms. And the bottom, the cooler temperatures. Notice when we get to 140 to 160, we're killing most of the soil insects. 160 degrees is where it's really cooking. Those are your thermophiles at work. All plant pathogenic bacteria and most plant viruses are killed at that point. When you get up to 200, your compost is baking, and you probably need to give it a quick turn. There's a picture in the corner of a compost thermometer, and they are can be like 20 inches long up to a yard long. It just depends how much you want to spend. They're not necessary, but they are helpful, especially if you want to do the rapid compost and have gathered all your materials and want to see how hot it's getting. It's fun to do that then. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Water, and she's going to talk about how to actually build your compost pile.
Thank you, Sue. You see here a compost pile and 3 by 3 by 3 feet, that would be 27 cubic feet, is the ideal size for a pile, and indeed is the size of most commercial compost bins. Particle size 1/2 inch to 1.5. Now for the hot compost, as Sue said, you layer the greens and the browns in equal amounts. You dampen it like a wrung out sponge. Turn the pile every 3 days to introduce oxygen and raise the temperature. And she said it's like baking a cake. For cold or warm compost, it's more like making soup. The green-brown balance isn't necessary. It doesn't have to be perfectly balanced. You still should turn it because it will compost faster, and you put fresh additions in the center of the pile, and it's like making soup. And this little factoid at the bottom, strange but true, at 155 degrees, the matter will decompose twice as fast as at 130. Next slide. Tools. The big rule is keep them sharp. Okay, you don't really need exotic tools to have a good compost pile. In fact, they're just what you have for your yard, for your regular gardening. A shovel, pitchfork, a chipper or shredder or a lawnmower. You can use a weed whacker and a garbage can to chop up lots of materials. If you have lots of leaves, I believe Sue said she had leaves in a garbage can. Well, you can use a weed whacker. Now, if you're doing it on a smaller scale, you can use a blender or your composter, or you saw a photograph earlier of a little bowl with a humble pair of scissors to chop it up. You need pruning or lopping shears to chop up your yard waste, trimming off your bushes. Next slide. Oh, and as Sue said, a thermometer to monitor temperature. It's not necessary, but it's fun if you're kind of curious. The compost sifter to remove non-decomposed matter. Now this is this round sifter is a sifter that that gold miners use, and it fits perfectly over a 5-gallon bucket. It's very handy. Mine is made out of 1/4 inch screen, stapled to an old window frame I found on the street. But they all work. There's a little claw to turn the pile or to bury kitchen waste, the new waste that goes in the center of the pile. You'll need a wheelbarrow to move compost. And, you'll need, we'll talk about types of bins next. Next slide. Okay, this is my compost bin. And now it actually has three stacking sections, but I took one off because it's amazing how you can fill up the bin. And as it starts composting, it does get smaller. So I took the top off to make it easier to turn. And this is about 3 by 3 by 3. Okay, there are all kinds of compost bins. I've seen compost bins that look like Darth Vader. I've seen them that look like a Mayan temple. I recently saw a giant sphere that was about 3 feet in diameter, and the homeowner filled it with yard waste and just rolled it around his yard whenever he felt like it. And he told me he got great compost from it. I've seen a large tube made out of chicken wire. I've also seen, like an oil drum mounted on legs with a handle. And this is for people who really are making hot compost. They do a lot of turning. Next. Okay, here's some tools, and we'll go counterclockwise. These are short-handled loppers. I find them easier than the long ones. And here's a pair of scissors. These are edged with titanium, and they really do a wonderful job. You can cut through cardboard like a hot knife through butter. And then down here are some more normal garden trimmers. This is a digger outer. Actually, it's a Japanese weeding knife, but you can dig plants out with it. Here are your good old Felco shears. And in the center here, right here, is a very important tool. It's your sharpener. You really want to keep your tool sharp. It doesn't take but a minute, and it makes your work a lot more fun, and it's safer too. Okay, next slide. Okay, garden safety. Yes. Okay, this is all your protective equipment. Take a look at it, and take a look at the mask over nose and mouth. I also always wear a hat, by the way, to keep the sun out of my eyes. The mask over nose and mouth, we've all got them now, don't we? Well, it does come in handy when you're working with compost. The most common methods of pathogen transmission are ingestion, that's eating, inhaling, breathing, skin trauma, that's being careless like I always am and getting a cut. The people who are most in danger are the very young, the very old, and the immunocompromised. But I'm 70 years old and I have never seen anyone killed by a compost pile yet. The main thing is use common sense. It's common sense to use gloves when you're working in the yard, to wear long pants, to wear a long sleeve shirt, to wear safety glasses to keep a twig from getting in your eye. All of this, just use common sense and you will be just fine. Next slide. This is what we've been waiting for. This is a tub in my backyard with some compost. And true confession, this is some compost that was left at the bottom of a compost pile. I moved my bin and put it in a different location, and the ivy took over and I forgot about it. So what you see is some cold compost. This was cold compost. It's also, this is true confession. It's probably 5 years old. This is my wheelbarrow. On top of it is my homemade sifter. And you can see it's an old window frame with a 1/4-inch metal mesh that I got at the hardware store down the street. And I went on YouTube and learned how to use a staple gun and went bang, 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 and there it was. Works perfectly well and fits perfectly. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is what's left after I sifted it. You know, I was sifting it, shaking it back and forth. And after a while, I got tired of that and just started pushing it through. My hand was in a leather glove. It didn't make any difference. What's interesting is what's left behind. Take a look at the peach pits. You've got peach pits. I see at least one walnut shell in there. You've got some eggshells that were too big to go through the mesh. And you've also got those pesky plastic labels that you tell your family, oh, take them off before you put it in the little compost bucket, okay? And they say, sure, yeah, they did it. Well, they didn't. And they will never decompose, and they're always left behind on the screen. It's really very funny. Okay, next slide. And here is the beautiful finished product, and I am holding it properly in my gloved hand, and it has a nice, slightly damp texture, and it has this wonderful musky composty. It's just maybe a little bit of vinegar is in the air. I don't know, but it's got a very distinctive smell that I don't find unpleasant at all. And there it is, it's done. And it pretty much filled up my wheelbarrow, and it was all free. Next slide. Bin, location, and rotation. Well, there it is. The best system is the one that you will use. Okay, you know what you are like, all right? First of all bins, all the commercial bins work equally well. It's just the one you like. Okay, let's talk about location. You want a location that you are going to use. If it's too far away from your house, you're not going to go there. If you drop off your food scraps after dinner at night and you have a lively imagination, you're probably not going to walk to the end of the yard, okay? So you can have it closer to the house. It doesn't smell bad. And as you can see, they're not terrible looking either. As for rotation, if you are not going to rotate your compost 2-3 times a week for hot composting, you know what you're like. That's hot compost is not for you. Most people do warm compost. And you know what? If you flake out completely and end up doing cold compost, so what? It doesn't make any difference. It is eventually going to compost, and you can keep adding to the cold pile. And when you think that there's enough there that has actually composted and you sift it out, you just put the big pieces, unless they're walnuts or avocado labels, you just put them back in the compost pile. It's fine. So, you know, be a realistic person. You know what your nature is. Next slide. Troubleshooting. Okay, well, if it's too dry or too wet or has attracted pests, if it's dry, spray it with water. You want it to be the dampness of a wrung out sponge. Spray it with wrung out sponge. Spray it with water and turn it. If it's wet and smelly, okay, well, I know what's happened. Talk to your family and see if anybody put in dog poop or a chicken carcass or maybe a piece of old cheese. Clean it out, spread the compost out to dry, put it back in the bin. Rodents and other animals, we frequently have questions about this. This is because, again, there's some sort of, there's grease, there's meat, or you didn't bury the food waste in the center. You decided to just throw all throw the old bits of pineapple or strawberry hulls on top, and you didn't bury them in the center. Or maybe there isn't any protection on the bottom. Most compost bins, actually all the ones I've ever seen, they're just a shell. There's nothing on the bottom. So that handy 1/4-inch wire mesh, you can cut it up and put it underneath the bin. And there I see a really adorable little raccoon poking his head up. Yep, raccoons and possums are nocturnal, and they do like compost bins, but they don't get in mine because they keep the lid on it. Okay, next. These are resources. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I will tell you that they're all UC, University of California approved, and just you can scan it. We are going to have them up on our website. There's another slide. Okay, again, all UC approved. So these are all science-based. You can trust them. Next slide. Okay, these are upcoming events, and Sue told you about the one on April 24th, and which is sheet composting, and Penny told you about the one on June 12th, which is worm composting. And if you come to that, you'll get your worm bin with all the fixings, you know, to get everything you need, including worms, to get you started on worm composting. We're also having backyard composting on May 1st, and then harvesting your compost pile on May 26th, because a lot of people have questions about that. So that will be printed out on your garbage company bill, or you can go look on the UC Master Gardener Napa website. Okay, next slide. Find the slideshow and further resources on our website. And next slide. And this is our little logo with our California poppy. And before you start pelting us with questions, I would invite you to think about joining Master Gardeners. It's very, very fulfilling. Just as fulfilling as making valuable compost out of kitchen waste. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, so we had a couple of questions come in during the program. I answered some of them, but one of the questions that came in early on was, what about rats? Rats getting into the pile and how to deal with that. You did talk about putting some wire underneath, but any other suggestions?
Make sure you have a top on it. Okay, I confess, I had a rat in my pile, and rats are phenomenal. They can get in anywhere. They have no shoulders, I believe. They can squeeze in. So that's why I moved mine closer to the house, and I have not been bothered with rats since. It was in the most far away corner of my yard before. So I think the sense of human activity discourages them, and also it's keep it protected. Make sure you don't have anything like cheese or anything. I'm telling you, they really like that peanut butter sandwich, you know, and that's what I discovered was going into my pile. They really like peanut butter.
I have had rats in my pile, and it's usually when I don't stir it often enough.
Yeah.
find goodies in there and they can burrow around. And I think maintaining your pile and making sure you're actively turning it will keep it hot, and then you'll have less problems with the rodents.
That's true.
Speaking of hot, there was a question here also of what to do if your compost pile is not getting hot enough. Is there a way to make it hotter or to warm it up?
We have funny stories about that. Let's see, what is it? What's the one about Sue? Was it the woman who put alfalfa in her compost pile?
Yes.
Yes. Why don't you tell us?
Well, I heard that and it was near a fence, is the story I heard, and that there was a kind of smoldering old fence as a result of it. I don't know that it actually burst into flames, but it was close. It can get very hot.
It scorched the fence. Yes, you can. I think what you need are you need more greens, and you need to stir it up. That's what you need.
Yeah, in my experience from historically building piles, the people who are really good at it are really good about that 50-50 green-brown mixture, getting it started at the right quantities and making sure the moisture stays, not too wet, but you do want that moisture to stay in there. I often don't water mine enough so they don't really get going. So I think getting the balance right from the beginning will really help. And we often don't have enough greens in there, so that can be an issue.
And turning it introduces oxygen, which raises the temperature.
And we'll cool it down initially. When you first stir it, it actually cools it off, and it allows those microbes that work at the cooler temperatures to actually get some action in, and then the warmer ones will be able to come in again. Somebody's asking if you can use shredded office paper.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. That's a terrific thing. And ripping up cardboard.
Okay. The brown, correct?
Yeah, they're considered browns. You can even do your old, Penny talks about when she does worm composting, giving her worms her old tax documents, which I like.
I think one challenge a little bit with shredded paper is it can clump sometimes. When you're trying to moisten it, it's sometimes a little bit challenging. And the same with green grass. If you just put a big old load of green grass in there, it can often kind of compact and compress and become a big solid mass that won't get wet. So do kind of mix it in with other things, especially something like dry leaves is a great way to kind of break up some of that dense material that you might be adding.
That did happen to me, and I put in rice hulls because you can buy an enormous bag of rice hulls for something like $8, more rice hulls than a normal compost pile will need for years. So I gave most of them away, but what's great about rice hulls is they naturally aerate the pile. They're fluffy and they don't clump up. So they help you break up the clumping. I really like them.
Hey, Lonnie, would you go back one slide to the dates of the presentations? There. I wanted to mention that the May 1st program will be on, similar to this one, we'll be covering the same material, but if you attend that one, you will also get a discount on a compost bin. And you will get all the details on how to actually build. We're going to demo, and it'll be a lot of fun. You'll get a little more sort of a hands-on. We won't probably be doing it in person, but it will be a little more of a hands-on program on backyard composting. And as we mentioned, the worm composting, and you will also get a worm bin. So those are great workshops if you really want to get into this and get some of the materials. One of the questions we always get is how to harvest your compost, because you make this great stuff, but then how do you get it out of there? So we added that to our program for this year. So that'll be a really good presentation on May 26th as well. Somebody's asking, where would you buy rice hulls? Where did you get your rice hulls, Cindy, or where would you typically find those?
Any feed store.
Farm supply, feed stores. Yeah, great. So somebody's asking here, do browns, greens, and the no-nos you talked about earlier apply to worm composting? How do those greens and browns and the things to not add to, it's a little different for worm composting, isn't it?
Right, although we avoid putting dog poop in all of our compost piles, you know, so that's Penny, would you like to talk about what goes in the worm composting?
Yes, we put newspaper, shredded paper, rice hulls, coffee grounds, old leaves. And when I build a cardboard, when I build a pile for my worms, I do the lasagna method and let the worms mix it. And it also has to be wet. And it's a wonderful fertilizer. I encourage everybody to have a worm bin. Lonnie
Yeah.
has a worm bin.
Yeah, and Penny helped me by also saying you can put a little bit of chicken manure in the worm
right.
bin. And also, because worms need a little bit of help with digestion, you want to put something that's gritty in with your worm compost. And that surprised me when I was helping Penny with doing one of these demos, and she said, "Oh yeah, you got to have something so they can help digest the matter that they're eating."
The worm bins do not get hot. That's a big difference, though. The worms can't tolerate the heat, so they're working in a cool pile. You can also add a little more food product, a little more of the vegetable matter to a worm bin, and it can be a little bit different what you're adding. I know a lot of people have both. They have a regular compost pile, a hot compost pile, and then a worm compost bin as well, because they kind of take different materials.
And sometimes people ask the question about, do worm composters smell? And I've had mine on my deck for the past year, and there's no odor whatsoever coming from it.
I had mine under my dining room table for years, and no one ever even noticed. Was quite convenient. I could just throw the food right in there.
That's funny.
Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Do come back to our library series. The library is doing all kinds of wonderful Zoom series right now for all different topics. I would recommend that you go to their website and check it out, and join us back here for another Master Gardener program next month. Our topic is going to be gardening on a shoestring, looking at propagating plants using asexual propagation, so not using seeds. We hope you'll join us again on the first Thursday of the month at 7 o'clock. We'll be back next month. Thank you, everyone.